For my mother-in-law's 60th birthday, the Goo family had booked the entire top floor of the hotel, and the scene was lively beyond measure. I held my 10-month-old son, Tom, and made my way toward the main table. But in my seat sat another woman, her makeup striking. She wore a dress in the same color scheme as Henry's suit and was smiling sweetly as she chatted with my mother-in-law. It was his new secretary, Wendy. I stood awkwardly to the side. Henry saw me and barely furrowed his brow. "It's inconvenient for you to hold Tom here. Go sit at that table over there." His tone was flat, as if he were merely directing an unrelated guest. The glances from the other guests varied, and the whispers buzzed in my ears like mosquitoes. "Isn't that Secretary Wendy? Standing there with Mr. Henry, truly a perfect match. I heard Mr. Henry has been taking her everywhere lately, inseparable. Looks like the rumors are true. Christina, with no status, it seems her position is no longer secure." I held onto Tom's arm, instinctively tightening my grip. Just then, Wendy stood up carrying a glass of juice and walked toward me. With a startled cry, she spilled the entire glass of orange juice onto the hem of my white dress, spreading a glaring yellow stain. "Oh dear. Christina, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." She apologized with her mouth, but there wasn't a hint of remorse in her eyes. Instead, there was a slight smile as if enjoying the show. Before I could speak, Henry had already hurried over, shielding Wendy behind him. "Wendy didn't do it on purpose, and neither did you. Why are you standing here blocking the way?" He turned to me, his tone full of reproach. "Just go change your clothes, isn't that enough?" After saying this, he actually turned to the waiter and said, "Bring Wendy's secretary a cup of hot stomach-soothing tea. She has a weak stomach and can't drink anything cold." I stood there stunned. There was a time when he would even find it pretentious if I drank an extra sip of hot water during my period. Now, he was so attentive to a secretary who had made a careless mistake. Back at the table, Wendy took the initiative to come over and reached out to tease Tom in my arms. "What a cute baby. What's his name?" Her voice was neither too loud nor too soft, just enough for everyone at the table to hear. "But Mr. Henry, the baby is almost a year old, and the parents still haven't gotten their marriage certificate, right? I've heard that nowadays, kids without a marriage certificate face all sorts of troubles with school enrollment and household registration later on. Christina really needs to hurry up." The moment those words were spoken, the laughter and chatter around the table abruptly ceased. All eyes turned to me, filled with sympathy, mockery, curiosity, each expression different. My face went deathly pale, and I felt as if the blood in my body had frozen. Henry finally furrowed his brow, but it was directed at me. "Wendy is just kindly concerned about the child. Who are you scowling at?" The matriarch at the head of the table glanced at me coldly and said only one thing: "It's a day of celebration, don't spoil the mood." With that, she turned away and continued to receive the other guests' birthday wishes, as if everything that had just happened was none of her concern. Seeing this, Wendy's eyes gleamed with even more triumph. Taking advantage of the toast, she leaned close to my ear and whispered in a voice only the two of us could hear, "So what if the rice is cooked? Without that piece of paper, you'll never have a place to stand, and neither will your son. He's an illegitimate child." A buzzing sound exploded in my mind, and all my reason collapsed instantly. I grabbed the teacup beside me and hurled it at her smug face. The scalding tea drenched her head and face. "Ah!" Wendy screamed. The next moment, a tremendous force shoved me hard away. Staggering back a few steps, Tom in my arms burst into a terrified wail. Henry stood before me, his eyes bloodshot, fury blazing. "Christina! What the hell are you doing? Don't you have any shame at my mother's birthday banquet?" He didn't even glance at me or the child, quickly took off his coat, and draped it over the drenched Wendy. Carefully supporting her, he hurried out of the banquet hall. The whole world fell silent. Only Tom's heart-wrenching cries and my numb, icy heartbeat remained. Late at night, the villa door clicked open. Henry came back reeking of alcohol. A trace of impatience and fatigue showed on his face. Wendy already knows she was wrong today. She's young and speaks without thinking. Was it really necessary for you to embarrass her like that in front of everyone? You ruined my mother's birthday banquet. Seeing my cold expression, his demeanor softened immediately. Be good, listen to me, all right? Don't be so willful from now on. He stepped closer, intending to hug me. I instinctively took a step back, my gaze falling on the collar of his shirt. There, glaringly obvious, was a bright lipstick mark that wasn't mine. I said nothing. Silently, I pulled out from my pocket the marriage registration appointment slip I had hidden for 3 years. In front of him, I tore it to shreds. Then, I turned my phone screen toward him, displaying the breakup agreement the lawyer had just sent. Let's end this here. What do you mean, you want to break up with me? Henry looked at the agreement, the drunkenness on his face instantly half clearing. He snatched my phone, staring intently at those few lines as if trying to see through them. Christina, are you crazy? He growled, threw the phone to the ground, and stomped on it hard twice. All this over such a trivial matter today? Over a seat, a few idle words? Our son is so young, and you want to separate from him? Since when did you become so petty, so unreasonable? He stepped in front of me, pointed at my nose, questioning me line by line. I said nothing, just bent down to pick up the phone he had thrown away. The shattered screen cut my finger, and a streak of blood immediately seeped out. Henry instinctively reached into his pocket. It was his habit, his stomach was weak, so he always carried stomach medicine and a few band-aids with him. But after feeling around for a long time, he found nothing. His movement froze, and a flicker of unease crossed his face. I remembered, earlier in the banquet hall, Wendy had coquettishly said she'd cut her hand on some paper. That's when he took the last band-aid from his pocket and gently stuck it on her. I looked at my bleeding hand and suddenly smiled. You gave your band-aid to Wendy, didn't you? His eyes darted away, but his voice remained defiant. So what? What does that prove? Can you stop making a big deal out of this? Can you just be reasonable? His voice grew louder and louder, finally waking Tom in the next room. Wah, the child's sharp cry pierced the air like a needle, stabbing painfully into my heart. Henry scratched his head irritably. Cry, 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 all he does is cry. It's so annoying. Seeing the annoyance all over his face, I calmly asked him, which brand of formula is our son allergic to? He was stunned. When his eczema flares up, what ointment should be applied? Which drawer at home is the ointment kept in? He opened his mouth but couldn't utter a single word. The sneer at the corner of my mouth deepened. How could he possibly know? In his eyes, giving birth and raising a child were solely my responsibilities. He only had to provide a sperm, then comfortably play the absentee landlord. I walked into the bedroom, expertly prepared the formula, and gently rocked Tom to soothe him. Soon, the child quieted in my arms and fell back asleep. I stepped out and placed a freshly printed agreement on the coffee table in front of him. Sign it. Otherwise, I will file a lawsuit on the grounds that your long-term affairs have seriously harmed the rights and interests of me and the child. That marital home registered only under your name, which we bought together, I have evidence proving it is our joint property. My gaze shifted to the lipstick mark on his collar. And this, do you want me to find someone to test the DNA on it? Henry's face turned deathly pale in an instant. He looked as if all his strength had been drained, staring at me with unblinking eyes. Christina, was this all planned from the start? I said nothing, merely pushing the pen toward him. Ah. Suddenly, like a wild beast gone mad, he tore the agreement on the table to shreds, snapping the pen in two with a sharp crack. Don't even think about it. Christina, I'm telling you, you'll never leave me in this lifetime. He picked up a beautifully wrapped box from the entrance and placed it in front of me. Think carefully about your son. Don't do something you'll regret. After saying that, he slammed the door and left. I looked down, it was a limited edition children's smart robot. Once again, using the child to bind me. My phone gave a soft ding, and the screen lit up. It was a friend request. The profile picture was Wendy's face, beaming with a triumphant smile. The verification message read, "Chat?" I accepted it. Almost instantly, a photo was sent over. The background was a messy king-sized bed in a five-star hotel. A man's tie was casually draped over a sexy black lace nightgown. That tie, I know it all too well. I gave it to Henry as a gift on the day his company went public. Beneath the photo, there was a caption, "Mr. Henry says, a young body fuels his desire to conquer." Christina, you're getting old. I stared at that photo, lost in a daze, memories flooding back. I remembered when Henry's company was just starting out, short on funds. I, as the CFO, secretly mortgaged the only house my parents left me to fill the financial gap for him. He had tears in his eyes then, saying, "Christina, when the company goes public, we'll hold the grandest wedding the world has ever seen, so everyone knows you are Henry's wife." I recalled the surprise pregnancy and our overwhelming joy. On the day we were supposed to register our marriage, he received news of an urgent overseas project and had to leave immediately. I smiled and told him, "It's okay, go ahead. Your career comes first. The wedding and the certificate can wait. The baby and I will be here, waiting for your triumphant return." He held me, his eyes red with emotion. "Christina, wait for me. The first thing I'll do when I come back is marry you." So, I went to prenatal checkups alone, endured morning sickness alone, and carried my big belly while handling the company's complicated finances by myself, stabilizing the home front for him so he wouldn't have a single worry. Countless late nights working overtime, we squeezed into a tiny rented room, sharing a bowl of street-side wontons. He always gave me the biggest pieces, drinking the clear broth himself. "Christina, in this life, I, Henry, will never let you down." Those vows still echo in my ears. Those sweet memories remain vivid. But now, they've been shattered by a single photograph. The man who promised me the whole world has long since lost his way home amidst the bright lights and revelry. My care, my waiting, my sacrifices, it turns out, they were all just a joke. I looked at Tom sleeping beside me, his small face still streaked with tears. A burning tear finally fell, landing on the cold floor. The last shred of hope was completely shattered. "Henry, we're finished." I spent 3 days calmly packing up everything belonging to Tom and me. During that time, Henry never came back once. But news about him was everywhere. The CEO of the Goo family made a high-profile appearance at a business dinner with his new lover, lavishly spending tens of millions to purchase the heart of the ocean, bringing a smile to the Pomeranian. An insider revealed, Henry has long kept a secret mistress, and his new lover has moved into his billion-dollar mansion under his name. In the photo, Wendy wore a dazzling sapphire necklace, smiling brightly as she nestled close to Henry, their intimacy unmistakable. I calmly turned off my phone and called the moving company. I decided to personally deliver the final agreement to his office. Pushing open the door, I was stunned. In the spacious office, a corner had been sectioned off and transformed into a small walk-in closet and lounge area. Cosmetics, high heels, and all kinds of dresses were packed in tightly. I remember cautiously asking him if I could put a Tom-crawling mat in the corner of the office, so I could watch the child while working overtime. What did he say then? "Christina, this is an important office, not a daycare." It wasn't that it was impossible. It just depended on who it was. Wendy was sitting on the sofa, leisurely flipping through a fashion magazine. Seeing me, she showed no surprise. Instead, she stood up and held a brand new haute couture gown against herself. "Oh, Director Christina is here?" She smiled sarcastically. "Mr. Henry said it's too hard on me to accompany him to social events, so he specially had the brand send over all the latest season's new styles for me to pick from at will." I ignored her and walked straight to the desk, placing the file folder in front of Henry. "This is the last one. Sign it." Just then, Wendy, who was passing by me, suddenly let out a sharp scream and fell to the ground. The jade bracelet on her wrist shattered with a snap, scattering pieces everywhere. "My bracelet." This This was the only keepsake my mother left me before she passed. Henry immediately rushed over, helped Wendy up, then spun around fiercely, glaring at me. Christina. Are you really that cruel? Don't go too far. Even bullying has its limits. Apologize. I looked coldly at their clumsy performance. I didn't touch her. There's surveillance here. Just as I finished speaking, Wendy's phone suddenly rang. As if on cue, she pressed the speakerphone button. A sharp female voice came through the line, cursing. Wendy, you bitch. A homewrecker seducing other women's husbands. You deserve to die. We will always support Christina. Just wait to be cyberbullied. Wendy's tears flowed even more fiercely. She grabbed Henry's arm, trembling all over. Mr. Henry. I don't know who leaked my phone number, but so many people are sending me hateful messages and harassing me with calls. Henry's face had turned as ugly as could be. He snatched the agreement from in front of me, grabbed a pen, and signed his name without even looking. How dare you have someone harass Wendy? That's truly despicable. He threw the signed agreement harshly in my face. Christina, you really disgust me. The paper scraped across my cheek, stinging a little. I bent down calmly and picked up the freedom that weighed more than 1,000 pounds to me. Without glancing at that wretched couple, I turned and walked away. At the door, I stopped, took a small box from my bag, and gently placed it on the cabinet by the door. Inside was the tiny silver ring he had bought me with his first month's salary all those years ago. He said this was a token of our love. Now, I'm returning it to him. From this moment on, we owe each other nothing. After Henry signed, a wave of irritation swept over him. He comforted Wendy, who was crying in his arms, when his gaze inadvertently caught sight of the box on the cabinet by the door. His pupils suddenly constricted. That was. He suddenly shoved Wendy aside and dashed out of the office like a madman. The corridor was empty. He rushed to the elevator, frantically pressing the down button. The elevator doors opened, and he bolted inside, sprinting all the way down to the company's ground floor. At the lobby entrance, I was calmly settling into a black Maybach that had been waiting there, holding Tom in my arms. The car door closed, and it sped away, leaving a trail of dust behind. Henry stood there dumbfounded, his heart gripped tightly by an invisible hand. A feeling he had never known before, panic, swept through his entire body in an instant. The black Maybach sat silently, like a fortress cut off from the world. The window slowly rolled up, completely shutting out Henry's stunned, frantic face. I didn't even glance back at him once. Behind the wheel was Sean, my childhood friend I hadn't seen in years. He was now the head of the Asia region for a multinational investment firm. A few days ago, I called him, and without hesitation, he flew back from abroad. Everything's taken care of? Sean looked straight ahead, his voice steady. I lowered my head and kissed Tom's soft cheek. From now on, it's just the two of us. Sean glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his eyes filled with tenderness. No, you still have me. My phone started vibrating wildly, the name Henry flashing repeatedly on the screen like a death warrant. I turned it off immediately. That number, along with that unbearable past, needed to be erased completely. Sean took us to a top-floor apartment with tight security. Pushing open the door, warm light poured out. Everything in the room was already arranged, from the crib to Tom's favorite toys, all perfectly in place. Even the fridge was packed with fresh ingredients. This place is absolutely safe, he won't find us. Sean took Tom from my arms, holding him expertly. You get some rest. Leave the rest to me. I watched his tall figure, my eyes welling up. Over the years, for Henry's sake, I had almost cut off all contact with friends. I thought having love meant having the whole world. Now I realize, when the whole world abandoned me, he was the only one still standing by. Meanwhile, Henry stood downstairs at the company for a long time. Only after the taillights of that Maybach completely disappeared did he, lost and despondent, return to the office. Wendy immediately stepped forward, a triumphant smile still on her face. Henry, that woman is finally gone, from now on we get lost. Henry's voice was hoarse, his gaze so cold it seemed murderous. Wendy's smile froze on her face. Henry, you. I said get lost, didn't you hear me? Henry suddenly waved his hand, sweeping all the documents on the table to the floor. Wendy shivered in fright, not daring to say another word, and scrambled out in a hurry. The office fell back into a deathly silence. Henry slumped onto the sofa, his mind replaying over and over the resolute figure of me carrying the child into the car. He picked up his phone and dialed my number repeatedly. The cold female voice from the receiver was always, "The number you have dialed is switched off." Frustrated, he smashed the phone against the wall, shattering it into pieces. His gaze fell on the small box on the cabinet by the door. Trembling, he walked over and opened it. Inside was the silver ring he had long since forgotten. He remembered that day when he got his first month's salary and took me to the night market. Amid the noisy crowd, he knelt on one knee and slipped this 99 yuan ring onto my finger. "Christina, when I have money, I will definitely buy you the biggest diamond in the world." At that moment, I cried like a fool. "I don't want diamonds, I just want you." Memory stabbed into his heart like a knife. He suddenly grabbed the box and rushed out of the company. He drove wildly through the city, searching frantically. He went to the rental where we used to live, to the dessert shop I loved most, to the park where we had our first date. I was nowhere to be found. As night fell, exhausted, he returned to the villa he once detested so deeply. Pushing open the door, darkness engulfed the room, cold and devoid of any sign of life. Everything that belonged to Tom and me was gone. It was as if we had never lived here. Only on the coffee table in the living room sat the children's smart robot he had thrown to me. He walked over and pressed the switch. A pre-recorded voice came from inside. "Tom, be good. Daddy loves you." In the empty room, those words "I love you" felt unbearably ironic. The next day, the stock price of Goo Corporation began to plummet without warning. Within half an hour of opening, it hit the daily limit down. The entire company was thrown into chaos. Henry sat in his office, overwhelmed, listening to the finance director's urgent report. "Mr. Henry, we've been maliciously shorted. Someone, who knows who, has precisely exploited financial loopholes in several of our overseas projects, spreading a flood of negative news and causing market panic." Henry suddenly stood up. Financial loopholes? These core secrets were known only to him and one other person. Christina. A chill shot from his feet straight to the crown of his head. He immediately rushed out of the office and drove straight to the old house left by my parents. That was the only place we still had any connection. He pounded on the door frantically. "Christina. Open the door. I know it was you. Come out. What exactly do you want?" No one answered. Like a trapped beast, he paced anxiously back and forth at the door. His phone rang. It was a call from the company's board of directors. "Henry. What the hell are you doing? Why has the stock price plummeted like this? I don't care what methods you use, but you must stabilize the stock price within 3 days. Otherwise, you can start packing your things." Henry hung up the phone and slammed his fist hard against the wall. Blood instantly welled up on the back of his hand. For the first time, he felt fear. He had always thought I was just a decorative vase dependent on him. He forgot that I was also a top graduate from a prestigious university, a financial prodigy. He forgot that during the toughest early days of his company, it was me, the CFO, who stayed up countless sleepless nights with him, producing one flawless financial report after another, securing investment after investment. My understanding of his company even surpasses his own. At that moment, a news pop-up appeared. A mysterious financial group takes action, precisely targeting the Goo Corporation. Industry insiders analyze that there may be a mastermind behind this move. The accompanying image was a blurry side-profile photo. In the picture, Sean stood calmly by a huge floor-to-ceiling window, talking on the phone. And I was sitting on the sofa beside him, leisurely sipping coffee. Henry's eyes instantly reddened. Sean. Of course he knew him, the only male friend I had ever mentioned. He had always thought Sean was just an ordinary office worker. He never imagined Sean was the renowned capital hunter on Wall Street. So, he believed my leaving him wasn't a momentary impulse but a well-planned move to find a more powerful ally. Jealousy and anger gnawed at his heart like venomous snakes. Christina, you did great. He gritted his teeth, took out another phone, and dialed Wendy's number. Hello, Henry, Wendy's voice was choked with tears. Come to me immediately. His tone was cold, devoid of any emotion. He needed an outlet for his frustration. And Wendy was the perfect tool for that. Meanwhile, I was sitting on the apartment sofa, staring at the rapidly falling green line on the computer screen. Sean placed a cup of warm milk beside me. The first step was very successful. I lifted the glass of milk but didn't drink it. This is just the beginning. My gaze fell on another document. It contained all the tax records of the Goo Corporation. Henry, did you think I would only short your stock price? You forgot the beautifully forged accounts you made to secure that overseas project. And I still have the original drafts of those fake accounts. Wendy soon arrived downstairs at the old house. She saw Henry's hands covered in blood, his face dark and grim, and was too frightened to speak. Get in the car, Henry ordered. The car sped off and stopped in front of a luxury boutique. Go in, buy whatever you like. Henry tossed down a black card, his tone utterly cold. Wendy froze for a moment, then burst into ecstatic joy. She thought Henry was making it up to her, trying to win her over. She immediately rushed into the store and started shopping frantically. Bags, clothes, jewelry, as long as it was expensive, she piled it all onto herself. Henry sat in the car, expressionless as he watched her. Seeing her greedy and shallow way of devouring everything, he suddenly felt a wave of nausea. He thought of me. I would never act like that. When I went shopping with him, I always only looked at the sale items. When he wanted to buy me a more expensive bag, I would feel guilty for days, telling him he was wasting money. The phrase I said most often was, money should be spent wisely, the company still has many places that need funding right now. Why? Why would he push away such a wonderful woman with his own hands? Why would he hurt me, whose heart and eyes were filled only with him, for this vulgar woman in front of him? The more he thought about it, the more his heart ached, and a sharp pain began pounding in his head. Henry, I've made my choice. Wendy, carrying bags and packages, smiled brightly as she climbed back into the car. Like presenting a treasure, she held out a brand new limited edition bag to Henry. Henry, look, isn't it beautiful? I searched for so long to find this. Shut up. Henry cut her off coldly. Just hearing her voice now made him unbearably irritated. The smile on Wendy's face froze once again. Henry started the car and drove her straight back to her place. Here's your stuff. You can get lost now. He threw all the shopping bags at the door without even glancing at her and drove off immediately, leaving Wendy alone, disheveled in the wind. Henry returned to the empty villa. He opened the liquor cabinet and kept drinking bottle after bottle. Even alcohol couldn't numb the pain in his heart. He stumbled into Tom's room. The smart robot was still lying quietly on the floor. He walked over and kicked it hard. The robot slammed against the wall, emitting a harsh electric crackle before falling completely silent. Like a madman, he began smashing things. Tom's toys, my dressing table, our only photo together, everything that held our memories was shattered by his own hands. Only when he could no longer break anything did he collapse amidst the wreckage, like an abandoned dog. The phone rang. It was his mother calling. Henry, what on earth is going on between you and Christina? I went to the old house to find her today, and the neighbor said she's already moved out. And what's going on with the company's stock price? There are rumors flying everywhere. Are you keeping that so-called secretary on the side? Let me tell you, those kinds of women are just for fun, but they must never set foot in the Goo family. Christina is the only daughter-in-law of the Goo family, and she's Tom's mother. You better find Christina and bring her back to me. Do you hear me? Henry listened to his mother's furious shouting, then suddenly burst out laughing. He laughed until tears streamed down his face. The next day, an anonymous tip-off letter was sent to the tax authorities. Inside was a complete chain of evidence proving Goo Corporation's tax evasion. The evidence was solid and indisputable. The tax department immediately set up a special task force to launch a full-scale investigation into Goo Corporation. As soon as the news broke, the already teetering stock price plummeted like an avalanche. Countless shareholders protested outside the company building, demanding Henry give an explanation. The board held an emergency meeting overnight and dismissed Henry from his CEO position. From a lofty CEO, he became an outcast overnight, a beaten dog everyone wanted to attack. I saw the news on TV. Sean sat across from me, elegantly cutting his steak. Now, he probably won't have time to bother you anymore. I watched Henry, cornered and disheveled by reporters on the screen, feeling not a flicker of emotion. That's not enough, I said, putting down my knife and fork. I want to make sure he has nothing left. Sean smiled. As you wish. Do you still remember the trust fund your father left you back then? I was stunned. My father passed away when I was very young, leaving only a trust fund for my mother and me. He said that the money could only be accessed when I got married. Later, after my mother died and I met Henry, I completely forgot about it. You secretly mortgaged the house your mother left behind to help him, Sean said, looking at me with eyes full of tenderness. But what I never told you was that your father was my godfather. He had long anticipated that you might be deceived, so he added a clause to the trust. This fund can only be accessed by you personally, or by me on your behalf, and only for your career or living expenses. The money you used to buy that wedding home was never your joint savings, it was transferred to you from this fund by me. This was the first twist I hadn't anticipated. I had always thought that house was bought with the hard-earned money the two of us had saved together. I had always believed that I had given everything for him. Little did I know, there had always been an invisible hand protecting me from behind. I've kept all the transfer records. Legally, that house is 100% your personal property. Tears finally slipped down my cheeks. Not because of Henry, but because of my long-gone father and the man before me who had silently guarded me all these years. Don't cry. Sean pulled out a tissue and gently wiped away my tears. Those who hurt you will have to pay. Henry was taken away by the tax authorities for investigation. All the assets under his name, including the marital home he thought was his safe haven, were frozen. He was locked in a small interrogation room, unable to close his eyes for days and nights. He couldn't understand. He couldn't understand why I would be so ruthless. Even more, he couldn't understand where the money for buying the house had come from. That was until his lawyer laid out one bank statement after another in front of him. He looked at the signature Sean on them, and the name of a trust fund he had never heard of, and completely broke down. It turned out that the career he was so proud of, the wealth he depended on to survive, had from the very beginning been built on the sandcastle I had given him. He didn't marry me. He was the one marrying into me. This realization hurt him more than killing him would have. Wendy's fate was no better than Henry's. I had evidence of her forged academic credentials and work history anonymously sent to all her colleagues. At the same time, the heirloom jade bracelet she had smashed, the one supposedly from her mother, was exposed as a cheap fake bought for 9 yuan and 99 cents with free shipping on some shopping website. In no time, Wendy became the laughingstock of the entire company. Wherever she went, she could feel the pointed stares and hear the unabashed laughter behind her back. She went to the newly appointed CEO, tearfully claiming she was being wronged. The new CEO was someone I had Sean arrange, a sharp, capable woman. She didn't even glance at Wendy and simply tossed out, "Goo Group doesn't keep slackers, let alone liars. HR will talk to you. Go handle your resignation paperwork yourself." Wendy was fired. She lost the job that had given her access to high society and fed her vanity. Worse still, her glorious deeds were posted online by busybodies. Countless netizens flooded her social media accounts, mercilessly tearing her apart. With a face like a mistress, it's no wonder her character is questionable. She even uses her deceased mother as a prop for lies. How filial. People like her deserve to be blacklisted in the industry. Get out of our design circle. Her past scandals of climbing the ladder by relying on men were all dug up one by one. She was completely socially dead. She wanted to find Henry, only to discover that Henry had already been taken away by the tax authorities and was in no position to help. Those sugar daddies she had previously attached herself to, upon hearing about her troubles, all quickly distanced themselves from her. The landlord reclaimed the luxury apartment she rented, and her designer goods were sold off. Overnight, she went from a glamorous white-collar worker back to a penniless country girl. She was unwilling to accept it. She vented all her resentment on me. She found the address of the old house my parents left behind, and one late night, carrying a bucket of red paint, she rushed over. She wanted to cover the door with curses against me. She wanted to destroy me. But as soon as she reached downstairs, she was stopped by 2 bodyguards dressed in black. They were people Sean had arranged long ago. "Who are you? Let me go!" Wendy screamed and struggled. The bodyguards expressionlessly snatched the paint bucket from her hands and then called the police. Disturbing the peace, deliberately damaging others' property. Though not a crime punishable by death, it was enough for her to spend some time reflecting in detention. I learned about this from Sean the next day. "She won't have another chance to hurt you." I nodded and held Tom a little tighter. Looking out at the bright sunlight, I felt for the first time how refreshing a world without Henry could be. My revenge was far from over. Henry, Wendy, this was just the appetizer. The real feast was yet to come. Henry had been inside for half a month before being released on bail. Those 2 weeks felt like an eternity to him. He had lost everything, his company, his house, his reputation. He had fallen hard from the clouds straight into the mud. On the day he was released, his mother came to pick him up. Once elegant and dignified, Megan now looked haggard and worn. "Henry, let's go home." She took his hand, tears streaming down her face. Home? They no longer have a home. The villa was seized, and the old house was sold off to pay debts. Now, they can only squeeze into a rented little apartment of less than 50 square meters. Back in that cramped, dim room, Henry's mother served him a bowl of noodles. "Henry, go find Christina," she sighed. Beg her to spare the Goo family for Tom's sake. If she's willing to come back, I'll even kneel and apologize to her." Henry held the noodles, unable to utter a word. But he was unwilling to give up. He couldn't just be defeated like this. He wanted to take back everything that belonged to him. So, he started searching for me like a madman. He waited for me downstairs at Sean's company. But Sean's security system is world-class, he couldn't even get through the front door. He sent me countless messages. From initial accusations and curses to later pleas and confessions. "Christina, I was wrong, I really know I was wrong. Will you come back? Let's start over. I can't live without you and Tom, please give me one more chance. I swear, I will never see that bitch Wendy again. You're the only one in my heart. Think about the 7 years we had, can you really be so heartless as to forget it all?" I looked at these messages and just felt ridiculous. When I didn't reply for a long time, he started to get extreme. He found out which early education center Tom was attending. One afternoon, he took advantage of the bodyguard's distraction and rushed in. He wanted to take Tom away. He thought that as long as Tom was in his hands, I would definitely give in. But the moment Tom saw him, he burst into tears. "Bad man. Go away." Tom struggled, refusing to be held. Henry was stunned. In his heart, a son should be connected to him by blood, naturally close to him. But the look in Tom's eyes was filled with fear and unfamiliarity. The teachers and bodyguards at the early education center quickly reacted, surrounding him tightly. Sean also received the news and rushed over immediately. Seeing Henry's frenzied state, he didn't hesitate and threw a punch. Henry was hit, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, and he fell to the ground in a sorry state. "Henry, if you dare lay a finger on that mother and son, I'll make sure you never see the light of day again." Sean's gaze was as cold as hell itself. Henry watched as he carefully cradled the crying Tom in his arms, soothing him softly. Then he saw me step quickly from behind, worry etched across my face as I took the child into my care. The three of us stood together, like a family of three. And he, like a superfluous clown. Jealousy and resentment almost consumed him. He got up from the ground, eyes red, roaring, "Christina! Tom is my son too. How dare you keep me from seeing him?" I looked at him coldly. "Because of you, you're unworthy of being a father." Henry was served with a restraining order filed by Sean, forbidding him from coming near us mother and son. He fell into utter despair. Then, the final straw that broke him arrived. This was also the second and last twist I had prepared for him. I filed a lawsuit in court, not to divide property, but to recover debts. On the day of the hearing, I submitted a series of evidence proving that all the funds I invested in Goo's company from its inception, under my personal name, were not marital joint investments but personal loans. Every sum was backed by legally binding loan contracts signed between me and CEO Henry. The contract clearly stated Christina's name, that if the company went bankrupt and was liquidated, I would, as the largest creditor, have the priority right to dispose of the assets. These contracts were all signed back when he was at his peak, when he didn't care about money at all. He waved it off carelessly, too lazy to even read the contents. He never imagined that the person he trusted most, his closest companion, had laid the deadliest trap for him from the very beginning. When the lawyer presented these contracts, Henry's face instantly turned pale. He seemed as if all the strength had been drained from his bones, collapsing weakly in the defendant's seat. He stared at me intently, his eyes filled with disbelief. "Why? Christina, since when did you start scheming against me?" I looked at him calmly and said, "From the first time you frowned at me for another woman. From the first time you took my efforts for granted. From the moment you first forgot the vows we made. Henry, it's not that I schemed against you, it's you who pushed me step by step to this point." The final verdict was without surprise. Goo Corporation declared bankrupt and liquidated, all remaining assets were handed over to me to cover the debts. Henry, overnight, lost everything and was burdened with massive personal debt. He was completely finished. When he left the courthouse, he looked like a walking corpse. His mother waited at the door, and seeing his despondent state, she rushed forward, ready to curse me out. "Christina, you venomous woman. You won't get away with this." Sean's bodyguards immediately blocked her. I didn't even glance their way and walked straight to my car. "Christina." Henry suddenly rushed over and knelt before me. He clung to my legs, weeping bitterly. "I was wrong. I really was wrong. Please forgive me. I don't want the money. I don't want the company. I don't want anything. All I want is you and Tom. For our family to live happily together. Give me one more chance, just one last time." Passers-by around us turned their heads, pointing and whispering. I lowered my gaze, looking at the man who once made me look up to him, and also brought me despair. "Henry. You want to know why I was so cruel? Because the moment you abandoned me and the child to put a coat on Wendy, there was another child inside me, just formed, not yet able to tell you of its existence. When you pushed me away, that child was lost too." Henry's sobs abruptly stopped. He suddenly looked up, his pupils contracting sharply, all color draining from his face. "You said, what?" "I'm telling you, you personally killed your second child." Henry froze as if struck by lightning. His lips trembled, unable to utter a single word, only tears pouring out uncontrollably. "That was the child we conceived in the very first month after deciding to have a second." I had planned to share this good news with him as a gift at my mother-in-law's birthday banquet. I even had the ultrasound report ready, tucked inside my bag. But instead, he gave me that kind of surprise. Staggering, I was pushed away by him, a sharp pain radiating from my abdomen. Among the crowd in the banquet hall, no one noticed my distress. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the backs of him and Wendy as they left. I was alone, feeling the warm blood trickle down my thigh bit by bit amidst Tom's heart-wrenching cries. That tiny life, just like that, vanished silently and without a trace. When I was at my most painful, when I needed him the most, where was he? He was in the arms of another woman, tenderly cared for by the secretary who showed him concern on my behalf. At that moment, I knew. The Henry I loved was already dead. What remained was just a shell, corroded by desire and fame. My love for him, along with the unborn child, died together. No. No. You're lying to me. You must be lying. Christina. Tell me this isn't true. I forcefully pried his fingers apart, one by one. It's true. Henry, there's already a life between us. Do you think we can ever go back? I pulled my hand away, never looking at him again, turned around, and got into the car. The engine started. Through the rearview mirror, I saw him kneeling there like a statue, motionless for a long time. Then, as if remembering something, he went mad, chasing after my car, screaming my name hoarsely. Christina! Christina! Until his figure grew smaller and smaller, finally becoming a pitiful black dot. I calmly withdrew my gaze, leaned back in the seat, and closed my eyes. Sean held my hand, his palm warm and strong. It's all over. I opened my eyes and looked into his deep gaze. No. It's just the beginning. A few days later, I held a press conference as the founder of Huiguang Capital. I announced the official acquisition of all assets of the Goo family group and its restructuring, injecting new business ventures. I stood under the spotlight, composed, confident, radiant. Below the stage, Sean held the sleeping Tom gently, looking at me with tenderness. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing us in warmth and brightness. As for Henry, I heard he had completely lost his mind. He wandered the streets every day, grabbing people to ask if they had seen his wife and child. His mother couldn't bear the blow and suffered a stroke, leaving her paralyzed in bed. His life had completely become a joke. But none of that had anything to do with me anymore. My life, after personally burying that unbearable past, finally welcomed a new beginning.